having so many viewpoints, what kind of value will it add? Will it make me a better person, or will it will become a soup in my brain? Because it's not just the fact that, hey, you should learn and read and always know a little bit more about the world around you. There's just so much information that if you try to dive deep into one topic, it's a rabbit hole of so much information, and people are getting their information from really cheap sources, not really nuanced, researched content. Information overload. What is the end of it?
This information overload is a threat, because the kind of dark information about murders or just violence in general is so overwhelming sometimes that it's okay that our brain is stopping us from knowing more about different things.
Hi guys, welcome to another edition of the Weekly Bustle. As you can hear, I'm outside enjoying the good weather while you guys enjoy this conversation with Mudassir. We started off with a wonderful quote / thought by James Clear about how when you have one world view, that's how you look at everything and every problem that you face. And it was a wonderful conversation with him trying to understand how we can improve our ability to challenge our worldviews, expand our worldviews, and learn a little bit more about ourselves. We also took a tangent into how do we deal with people who are different and in certain cases stubborn, or in certain cases not in control of their actions, and what can we do about them. And we don't have an answer for that. So that was a tangent we took, and we quickly came back from it because we didn't want to make the podcast about that. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with me and Mudassir, and I am excited to see and hear what you think.
Hey Mudassir, I came across this amazing idea / thought by James Clear. He's the author of Atomic Habits, and I follow his newsletter called 321. And it's a wonderful newsletter. I would also recommend you to sign up, and anyone who's listening. It's great. 3 thoughts that he shares every week, 2 ideas by other people, and then 1 question. And I think it's a wonderful way to learn and expand your horizon. And one of his thoughts that he shared in this week was, when one worldview dominates your thinking, then you try to explain every problem you face using that worldview. So he says, read more and learn there are different ways to reach or tackle the same problem, and there are different answers to the same problem. Now that's obvious yet profound, right? You have this obviousness of it that, sure, that is how it works. When I am a religious person, I explain the world with my religion. When I'm a scientist, I explain the world around me with science. If I am a logician, I care about logic. So that is quite normal. And I face that with myself as well. Whenever I'm in my philosophy circle and try to explain my point of view, everyone keeps labeling me as a utilitarian. He's like, that's utilitarian thinking, that's utilitarian thinking. For those who don't know, utilitarians are just people who think about an aggregated maximization of whole species in general. So what benefits the whole species rather than one person, that is the right direction to go for, right? For whatever reasons. I'm not going to delve into utilitarianism much, but just because I threw the term out there, I thought I need to explain it. So it's obvious that you have this concept, and it makes sense, because if you have your beliefs in you, embedded in you, that makes you you, those beliefs come from somewhere in that ideology. And that is the ideology and belief that you use to navigate your world. Pretty simple. But it's profound also because it makes you realize that, oh shit, I only look at the world with one worldview. And doesn't that sound limiting as well? Taking back to the philosophy example, whenever they would give me arguments about psychedelics or more on the pseudoscience level or spiritual level, my answer would always be, yeah, I don't know, but we don't have much evidence on that, right? We don't know what the reality is there. We can only focus on what we can measure. So we should look at empiricism as the gold standard. But their argument would always be, yeah, but why is that the only thing? Why isn't there more? Why is that the only way to look at the world? And that is fair. That is exactly fair. I don't know how to measure these things, so I believe they don't exist. So it is very interesting, if you think about it, how profound this thought is, that it will be one worldview that actually dominates your thinking. But you need to actively and consciously be aware of the fact that you have one worldview that dominates your thinking. And that is the part that I really, really enjoyed the most in this quote / thought. I thought maybe I would like to know your opinion on it because I know that you and I are the kind of people who try to learn more about different perspectives and not focus on just one viewpoint. But even when we do that actively, we sometimes get into the trap of looking at those viewpoints from our viewpoint, right? So everything makes only sense if you only look at it through the lens of empiricism or logic or whatever have you. And then it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. But we don't realize that we are already putting that bias in front of that viewpoint before even taking it at face value. So I really want to know your opinion. I want to know your thoughts on it. I think you would have something really nice to say on it, and I'm really curious to hear your voice note.
Hey, Ahad, I think the timing of your voice note is pretty perfect because I just decided to go on a late night walk, and walks are the time where I try to think about different things, especially anything that makes me curious, listen to podcasts, or just reflect in life in general. So, yeah, coming to this week's Stitch, I think the topic is very interesting. And I think also guilty of looking at things from my own lens or the worldview that dominates my thinking. And I do try to challenge it. I think a lot of people try to do that. But I also think that everyone is biased in a certain way because we all grow up in different environments, different cultures, and we've all been bombarded with different types of information. How you manage to challenge that at whatever age or whatever time is what makes us different. But yeah, like I said, everyone has their biases. uh, I also think that the problem over here is has a lot to do with this age of information where we have so much to know about. Even if we're going with a certain kind of worldview, there's still so much to know about. And just even if you're trying to understand a certain kind of thing, like if you're talking about religion, so even if you're trying to research religion, it can take you an entire lifetime, and there will be so much stuff still left to know. So sometimes this becomes very difficult. And as humans, we also want quick answers. um, and as complicated as the world is, which is something my worldview is dominated by, that things are complex, it's very hard to simplify them. So that changing your lens sometimes require a whole lot of extra time. uh, and if it's something that's not related to your career or immediate life, I think most people hesitate to put a lot of time into that, which I do think people should. But it's a very hard proposition to preach to everyone in the world. So I think that is the problem which stops people. And like I said, people want quick answers and they don't get it, because we have so many of them. And those quick answers wouldn't be coming from books by very researched individuals. Those quick answers will come from random Google searches or uh, small videos. They're good resource, but they're not good enough to base your entire research on. So I think this is the problem which stops most people. And obviously, just being willing to challenge your own thinking or worldview is again a big problem. This is something we've discussed in detail in our podcast. But I do think that the point of having limited time and so much information is the most difficult part in trying to challenge your own worldview. And I think I'm also uh, guilty of this problem, I would say, because finding a different worldview requires more investment of time and more willing to more willingness to wait for the answer. And it's not as easy as it might sound in the theory. So yeah, I would love to know what you think about it, and do you agree to what I just mentioned? And let's try to see where it goes from here.
I love your point of views already, Mudassir. I think there's so much here that we can unpack and even think about how to solve. Because what I hear is information overload. What I hear is the path of least resistance for the human behavior. And some of the things I do agree with. But for example, when you say it is difficult because life is complex and people are busy or something, they have too much to do, I personally believe they're lazy. Maybe you're saying the same, maybe I'm reading it wrong. I just think people are lazy and they prioritize what's important. And in a lot of cases, having access to the right information is not, it's not important enough. So what I'm thinking is maybe there needs to be a way that we can provide the people with the skills, with the tools they need to tackle this problem. Because it's not just that people are lazy to look for other things and it's difficult to look at the other side and just look at the world with your own biases, but it's also by design of social media and Google and all of the things around us that we always find what we're looking for. And when we are able to find what we're looking for, we don't really put in the effort to find the other side. Do you understand what I mean? It's echo chambers, right? So social media has made it so much easier for like-minded people to find each other and have your list full of people who are the ones you are interested in listening to because they validate your worldview. And I think what we need is by design to find a way to make people understand and curate the list of content and information they consume to be a bit of the opposite of what they're doing. A good example of this is something you also recommended once in our normal WhatsApp groups is Ground News, an app that tells you both sides of the story from in the US mostly if something is far left or far right or left or right. It tells you that this article is more left leaning, and if you want to read the right leaning article, please click on this particular provider. What that already does is help us, in a way, bridge that gap in our worldview. It's a hot topic in media right now in trying to find a way to bridge the political divide because people are just not curious enough about the other side. Because this belief system works, this worldview works, right? And that's what I'm understanding from what you're saying, that the the pieces of the puzzle are set up in a way that it just becomes very difficult for an average person to get out and learn more about the opposite side or even have the will to learn. Because I did read this research, and I think I've mentioned it before in some of my podcasts as well, and also in our conversations, that there was research that said that we developed the ability to reason to actually win arguments. So, our ability as humans to reason and understand and explain things is not because we were curious to understand the world around us, it because we were curious to win. We were driven to win against other humans and other Neanderthals who were having their point of views, and we developed this logical reasoning to make people understand that, oh, look, this makes sense. Why don't I believe what this person is saying? So that also tells you that we're evolutionarily biased to just look at what we know and confirm and spread that belief, no matter what. No matter what. So it takes a special kind of awareness to realize that, hey, what I know is one of many viewpoints, and I need to actively search out those viewpoints to just get a whole picture of what's happening in the world. This is one part of the discussion that I want to do with you and what I've heard from you and what I've given back. But other aspect of it is also, if you just stay on the point of information overload, having so many viewpoints, what kind of value will it add? Will it make me a better person, or will I just it will become a soup in my brain? And that is what I'm really curious about, because it's not just the fact that, hey, you should learn and read and always know a little bit more about the world around you. As you mentioned yourself, there's just so much information that if you try to dive deep into one topic, it's a rabbit hole of so much information, and people are getting their information from really cheap sources like short form content and Google searches, not really nuanced, researched content like books, like blog posts, like long YouTube videos. No, they're not interested in that. So that also, as I said, it's a feature, not a bug, in the design of how humans are made and also how our technology is enhancing that or exploiting that human behavior. But what I'm curious about is, So you can reply to the first element of this voice note as well, but also this one is the one that I want you to also think about is information overload. What is what is the end of it? If I know a lot of different viewpoints, what value does it add to me, or will I just become more confused? Because I've seen this firsthand myself. The more I learn about everything and how it works and how people react and how people function, and every reaction has a basis in it, the more I realize that I just cannot blame anyone. I cannot point fingers. I cannot judge. I cannot do anything what was supposed to be easy for me to do when I was young. Everything has a good reason now. Even if you hear stories, even in movies you see now, that the villains are not as simple as they're bad people. No, they're broken people. Society broke them. And because of that reason, they became villains. So you have a certain amount of sympathy now that, yeah, this person wants to destroy the world, but oh my God, society failed him. That's why. So everyone has a justification now. For every action has a justification now because of this information overload. Because now suddenly we know so much about everyone and so many things about everything that somehow everything becomes justified. So what value does that element add? Are we still not allowed to choose anymore? That no, everything is allowed now. So because now we know more about the world, so everything is allowed, so we have to be okay with it. And that is also not human. This natural tendency of having things a little bit black and white is missing these days. And that is the interesting element that I want to know about more about. Because yes, it was simple. The world is more complex. Sure, everything is great. What you're saying about it, that it's all complex. It was never supposed to be simple, but it was till an extent simpler. And now we're losing that simplicity, and that's confusing a lot of people because this added complexity, what does it add in terms of its value to us as society? And that's what I'm really curious about. Because I'm opposite to you in my worldview. I believe things are supposed to be simple, and this modular thinking is what I have crafted in my work, in my life, and everywhere. And I know how to make things very simple and then build up from there because that works for me. And that's what I'm now confused about when I look at this whole issue of information overload and everything having a reason now and everything justified now. I cannot make that fit into my model now. Like it's it's not simple anymore.
I actually really enjoyed listening to your voice note. I might not agree with a lot of what you said. I do think that makes up for a very good discussion, and it's only when we diverge more we have more learning opportunities. So, coming to your first point about people being lazy, um, I don't like to use the word lazy because it makes me think that people are actually doing it because they they can do it but they're choosing not to. I think that's not the case at most times, because we procrastinate or we become lazy because our brain is trying to stop us from something, a threat that it sees. And now that I think about it, this information overload is a threat, because the kind of dark information about murders or just violence in general is so overwhelming sometimes that it's okay that our brain is stopping us from knowing more about different things. All these existential thoughts that we get, the hopelessness that we get because of it, this is all that kind of um, it's counterproductive actually, because it doesn't help us as much as it destroys us in ways. But I do agree that we are comfortable with the information we know, and we're not. Sometimes we can challenge it, and it might not be harmful for us, but we don't do it. And that's the part where tools like the ground news or the Fediverse, for instance, is something that would make the world a better place in a way, because uh, in the case of Fediverse, it's not driven by ads, and I think it's the ads that make us that feeds the algorithm, that because at the end of the day, the more we view a certain type of content or the more we engage in these social media platform, the more profitable it becomes for them. And the only way to keep doing it again and again is feeding us the information that we want to hear. And I think the Fediverse is a complete opposite of these social media platforms. Although you can still argue that echo chambers will exist there, but at least that's a start, and we're at least going in the right direction. Whether it's successful or not, it's a separate debate. But at least it's a step in the right direction. So I think we should focus more on the tools that makes it easier to counter the current perspectives, and it makes it easier to know the other side, or just make people want to look at the other side more, and tell them to focus on certain type of things or become better at filtering. For example, they should focus on religion or moral philosophy or political ideologies, because that is the thing that drives their day-to-day lives. And even if they can change that, or they're willing to accept the other side of these things, I think that could make a huge difference. And that could be a starting point where they're willing to challenge what they believe in. So I think these two things is something we can do: provide better tools and just encourage people to know the other side of the story. Coming to your second point about not making things into black and white, and sometimes bombarding the information so much so that we'll start justifying criminals. And it comes at a perfect time, because I've been watching Breaking Bad these days, and I'm watching it for the second time. And this whole show is about an anti-hero who's a perfectly innocent guy living a typical US life, and he's just a layman, and he suddenly becomes a villain who's willing to kill people for his own benefit. And I think this also makes me think about this other podcast that I was listening just a few days ago, about a lawyer who makes the point that when you're um, with a person who's about to get a death sentence, who's about to die because the state um, thought that his crime is so big that the only way to provide justice is to kill that man. If you know a lot about their story and you live long enough with them, or just talk to them for a certain period of time, you'll start to maybe question whether the death sentence is the right way to go. It's because when we know more about someone's life, or just more information in general, we can make better choices actually. And if it wasn't for this access of information, I think we wouldn't have been challenging the death sentence in the first place. We know that jails aren't the same way in the West, at least in some part of the Europe, or death sentences are becoming increasingly and countries are increasingly avoiding it, because they the data suggests that they're not a very good tool to reduce crimes. And at the end of the day, the goal of the state is to reduce crimes and make the country a safer place to live for the citizens. So I think data does help, and whether we like it or not, it could be in aspects that we might not want to challenge. But I think that is the whole point of this debate, isn't it? And that challenging our worldview. If we're so focused on trying to find the right thing, we might not challenge the core beliefs that we have, and that's the beauty of um, just changing our worldview. And if we're not if we're not willing to change certain things, I think we're starting the wrong way actually. So I think the important part is to be willing to change everything and anything that we believe in. It's only then I think we can make the right amount of progress. And I know you'll have a different perspective to it, but I'm still willing to learn more and just engage in this topic, because I think this is a very fascinating topic. And the perspective that we share and the diverse perspective that we share are very fascinating.
What I love about your voice note is it perfectly complements what I'm saying, and even though it's the opposite and it's an argument against some of my points, it still is going in the right direction, and that's what I really really enjoy. The last part of your voice note is a bit scary for me, and by scary what I mean is not like the talk content, but more like the tangent we're taking. I feel like we're going to jump into completely a different thing about what jails are supposed to be and crime is supposed to be, etc., etc. So I would like to caution that we don't delve too much into there. Just talk about the overarching thing of the worldview, as you said. So I will try to control myself, but you know how it is. Right after 5 minutes in, 4 minutes in, suddenly you're talking about something else. So I will like to just remind. This is a reminder to me and to you to bring the conversation back if I somehow drift a little bit. On your first point, I completely agree with you that it is a brain problem or a brain phenomena, that we are doing this to protect ourselves unconsciously or subconsciously. What I don't agree with is why you want to call this a safety mechanism of sort, but not what I'm saying. So laziness is also a safety mechanism of sort, because evolutionarily speaking, we always were
calorie deficit, right? Because we had to always forage for food. So our brain has always evolved us to use as less calories as possible. By definition, that means lazy. So you might not like the word lazy because you're like, hey, the social connotation of it or the context of it is not right. But that is literally the definition of it, of laziness, that you're not doing something. And you can say it's because of procrastination or because you don't want to do something, but that's how it is. If you want water, would you drink it from the river next to you, or are you going to drink it from the river across the mountain? You're going to drink it from the river next to you. That's path of least resistance. So same goes here. You might feel like you don't want to do this, or you don't have the time to do the research or learn more, but your brain is just protecting you by not making you use more calories about for thinking about this stuff. And then you just go on your merry ways, just on autopilot, because the brain loves for you to be on autopilot all the time. That is the best way to preserve calories, so you don't do much thinking. And having to think about every worldview, every piece of information that comes to you, challenging your own ecosystems or echo chambers, all of that requires brain power, all of that requires calories. So our brain turns that off naturally. And then we feel like we're procrastinating or we're lazy or whatever have you, but that's just design. It's a feature, not a bug. And that is exactly why I feel like we need to have systems in place. The examples that I gave, we need to have systems in place that automate this for us. I'm obsessed with automation these days because automation is a way to hack the human body. Because if you rely on willpower, if you rely on our own choices, we will be bound to fail because our brain works differently than how we want to work, especially for people like you, or people who are into productivity, or people who are into learning more for learning's sake. These things the brain doesn't understand, because the brain is like, it's supposed to have a function. Expanding your horizons, learning more things are great, but it's not functioning you to live in a way at the moment. It doesn't add value to your life years in a way. It might add value to your mind and all of that stuff, but to the brain, from a biological perspective, it's like it's not needed. So it tries to tone it down. And that's why you need systems in place which help you learn. And you gave examples, like I gave examples of things like ground news and social media hacks that would prevent you from falling into this autopilot of sort. And you gave me an example of Fediverse, how that can also help you in challenging your worldview. But again, you said it yourself, it can reach echo chambers, and it will reach echo chambers because, again, we are designed to do that. We're tribal. We love to go to places where people agree with us. We love to be in places where we are comfortable. We don't want to challenge ourselves and put ourselves in uncomfortable situations. And that's where technology comes in to automate the procedure. Now, I'm thinking a very simple thing. Imagine your social media platform. They ask you for your likes, right? And then your likes and your things and everything, and you engage with some of the content, as you said, and then you see more of that content. But what if you just switch up that algorithm? You engage with some kind of content, and then they give you more of that content, but they also go like, these are opposite of the things that you like. Why don't you look at these things as well? And they give you opposite of whatever content you liked. So if you liked a left-leaning content, they give you right-leaning content. If you like something about one part of the world, they give you the other part of the world, just so they can expand your horizon. And that's something, it's on autopilot. You're just scrolling and you're consuming and you're not realizing that this is something else because you don't have to actively look for it. And you might feel challenged and annoyed, but at least technology helps streamline that process. So that was an example in my head that came from this conversation, from your voice note, that how do we automate to expand our worldviews? How do we automate this procedure so that we don't rely on the human? Because relying on the human is always the problem. Because a human is a human, and it has a multitude of reasons for doing nothing or doing something. And we need to find a way to make that out so that we can grow as a species. And that's just, again, as you will say and agree, and as I say and I agree with you, this is my worldview where automation is king, right? And how we need to automate everything because human is a problem. That's just my worldview. Because for me, things are simple and humans are not simple. So you try to take the human out of the equation and see if you can simplify the process as much as you can. And then you move forward to it, right? On your second thing about jail and all of that stuff, I'm not going to talk too much because this is the most of the stuff that I want to talk about. But on the jail and all of that stuff about death sentences and everything, that these are, I agree with you, these are archaic systems, and the punishments are also archaic in a way. And when you talk to people, you learn more information about these people, you realize, okay, there must be a better way. So the concept of jail in a society differs from place to place. In the US, it's punishment. In Europe, it's rehabilitation, right? But certain things cannot be rehabilitated. So what do you do there? Or do you want to sincerely believe that everything is possible to be rehabilitated? So those are the difficult questions society needs to answer. There's this book I read called Behave. is by a biologist, a neurobiologist, and his argument is that a lot of things that we do are not in our control. It's predetermined. He doesn't believe in free will. He believes everything is determined by your biology and your environment. So, for example, a very typical extreme example we give to try to make sense of these things is pedophilia, right? Pedophilia, it can be genetic, and but you can't blame someone for liking children, but you can blame them for acting on it. That's something we have decided as people, right? No, you should not be acting on it. Then it's fine. You can think about murdering someone, but if you don't, that's fine. You can think about doing something bad, stealing from someone, but you don't do it, that's fine. His argument is it doesn't matter if you don't do it or you do it, because even if you do it, it's not in your control, just like thinking about it is not in your control. So what do you do with these kind of people? And his argument is something I agree with, and something very dark is that those kind of people just don't have a place in society. They need to be sent somewhere. And he said he doesn't have an answer. This is just a very off the wind guess for him. They need to be sent somewhere where they just live themselves away from civilized society, because these people will keep making mistakes, and that's not their fault, that's their biology. So the biggest problem I see, and again, this is a tangent, that's why I really want you to make sure that we don't go too much into it, or this is a podcast in itself, because I just recently had the conversation about this with a friend of mine, and I loved it. So this is a podcast in itself. But if you see people consciously screwing up all the time in society. And in Europe, you don't believe everyone, in countries like Pakistan, the US, and everything, these people get, like, phased out. Just how society punishes them by them not being productive enough. They, God forbid, dies, or they just become into one ghetto region of society, not the gentrified ghetto system. I mean, more like just pushed out into the outskirts of society, and slowly they just get moved away from society because they're not on the same level. Like it's natural selection, but on a societal level. But in Europe, you don't do that. Everyone gets a minimum level of income to survive, to not die, so that they have a chance to jump back into society. They always have a chance to do something, but some of them still don't do something. I hear examples of Sadaf telling me, and my friend also telling me that there are people who just don't show up on time, Ahad. They don't show up on time. They show up on time one day and the next day they don't. What do you do with these kind of people? They're people who just don't know how to work. They don't know what works. They don't know what to do. They're not consistent. They're not stable. They're not what we society call functioning people, and not because of mental health reasons. They just don't do it. This is who they are. You can argue that this is mental health in a way, but they're just saying this is who they are. They just don't believe in work. They don't believe in consistency. They don't believe in discipline. They just don't do all of this. And they've never taught these things. So what do we do with those kind of people? Do we make them survive on this very, very base level income that the society gives them, just so they have an opportunity to go up, so that we don't leave no man behind or no person behind, or we let them go? And I don't know how to feel about that, because I'm like, those people already are pretty privileged compared to people in Pakistan who don't have a base level to support them, and everyone works there. But that's not true. I also know in Pakistan a lot of people who just don't work and rely on charity. So even I'm confused with this thing about what does society think is good for society. And jail, universal basic income, all of these are methods of society to progress and support its systems and find a way to deal with those who are not helping it progress. And my biggest question from all of this is, why do you need to protect everybody? And that's a very sad way or point of view of life. That you have to think in aggregates. You can't think in individuals. So you have to think in aggregates. You can't protect everybody. In a system defined by capitalism, you can't protect everybody. So I don't know. I'm hitting 10 minutes, so I have to stop. But I feel like this is a topic in itself.
So, coming to your first point about laziness, I think it's perfectly justified what you said. Our brains do try to conserve as much calories as it can, because as hunters and gatherers, we didn't know when we would get our next meal, and we tried to save up on calories as much as we could. So, yeah, I do agree with that. But that doesn't mean what I said about it isn't valid, because this is true that we're, as humans, we're not capable of handling so much information. And like I said, the information that we're getting, the news that we're getting, it's very, very dark. Um, our brains aren't wired to handle so much of negativity, so much of bad things happening around us, because even sympathy can go to such a long way, right? At some point, you start getting numb to it, or you just start avoiding it. Everyone acts differently, but like I said, um, we're not wired to handle so much information. So I think that definition still holds true, and both of us could be right in this. I do agree, like I said in my previous voice note, that the being comfortable with what you know and not trying to challenge it is still a problem. And we both agree that ground news is definitely a way to solve it. It might not be perfect, and I think nothing would be perfect. We do need many tools to fix a thing. Like if we're trying to fix a car, we cannot do it with one type of tool. We need multiple tools, and the tools keep getting advanced as well. And yes, I agree that Fediverse has its own problems. It creating more echo chambers, that is a problem, but at least it's a start. We're trying to solve the problem, we're trying to understand what the problem is, and one of the biggest problem is the ads that make us consume the same type of content that we want to listen to. So I think that's the right step, this a step in the right direction, I would say. But it's not complete, we can still work on it. So I think that answers the first part of what you mentioned. Coming to your second part, and yeah, that is very much a tangent, because uh, I mean, sure that it's a separate debate whether or not we should keep them a part of the society. Should we make them live somewhere else? Should death penalty still be there? But I think what I wanted to focus on was um, just trying to understand everyone's part of the story. If had we not looked into the thinking of how they're made, like you just mentioned how these criminals are born this way. I mean, I could agree or disagree with that, but at least you're trying to understand them. And in trying to understand them, and when you're uh, trying to do your research, you're always told to start fresh. Don't come up with your own theories. Don't try to um, come up with conclusions when you start. You should come with an empty bag and then try to fill it. So when you try to research on these criminals, you try to come up with an open mind. Maybe their story begs you to believe that maybe death punishment isn't the way, or maybe separating them isn't the right way. What we end up doing is debatable, like I said, but we need to look into every sort of information that we can. That view could be triggering for us. We might not agree with it, but it's only when we try to understand it, our conclusions would be better. Trying to look at it from a plain perspective or a binary perspective is what makes things wrong, I think. So I, I don't agree that oversimplification or just generally trying to simplify things. Yes, I do agree in the sense that um, sometimes simplifying it to understand the complex information is valid, but that doesn't mean we settled for something that might not give the full picture. So I will always be an advocate for researching more and researching all sides of the story. I would like to end it this way. If you still disagree, I'm still all ears and would love to answer it, or maybe start off with this new topic in a different podcast or a stitch, because I think it was very fun to talk about.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. A wonderful conversation with Mudassir about worldviews, about people not being able to control what they do, what they say, and how to deal with it as society. At the ending, Mudassir did have some points that I agreed with, and some of them I did not agree with. And I think I will leave that up to you to decide which one you resonated with the most. And I'm quite grateful that you got to listen to our conversation, and I'm excited to bring you yet another episode next week here at the Weekly Wasal with Ahad. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time.